a far-right party winning a state election in Germany for the first time since the Nazis, raising questions about Germany's political future.
Now, there have been some pretty surprising political results across Europe in recent months, accompanying the rise of censorship and surveillance and people's ongoing fears around migration. And I would add to that global corporatism. The Gilets Jaunes movement in France focused in particular, say, on BlackRock's inordinate power. And after the elections in France, Macron cobbled together a peculiar alliance and is still unable to name a prime minister for presumably because of bureaucratic challenges that are difficult for us to understand. He should probably ask for some help from his wife. She's always been a good older mentor, hasn't she? Really rather reliable. So let's have a look what's going on in Germany. And remember, stay with us because in just a few moments we'll be with Mike Benz, who will help us to understand how new movements, even if those new movements might have aspects that cause concern to some, are going to be required to oppose centralized bureaucratic authoritarianism that grants incredible power to corporations like Pfizer via their relationships with people like Ursula von der Leyen at the EU, who, as you recall, did deals at the height of the pandemic for millions of vaccines. That's not to mention the fact that her husband's got a vaccine company. So corporatism and globalism is a great threat. But in Germany, they're of course concerned about the results of the most recent elections. Let's have a look at some mainstream news coverage of those events.
Tonight, a political taboo has been shattered. A far-right party winning a state election in Germany for the first time since the Nazis, raising questions about Germany's political future and setting off alarm bells about the far-right's rise across Europe and beyond. The Alternative for Germany Party, or AfD, taking first place in the East German state of Thuringia and second in neighboring Saxony. The AfD, formerly accused by German intelligence of being an extremist group in both states. Front pages in Germany calling it a political earthquake and a slap by Germany's East. It's horrible. I find it unbelievable, this Berlin resident says. The AfD playing on fears about migration, especially by Muslim immigrants, and rallying opposition to foreign aid to Ukraine and to high costs of living.
Parts of East Germany feel that they've been left behind. They feel like they are not necessarily getting their part of the pie.
The AfD leader in Thuringia telling supporters at his victory party, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. One of the biggest losers, Chancellor Olaf Scholz, whose deeply unpopular center-left party hemorrhaged votes. Some of his coalition partners didn't even meet the 5% threshold to serve in parliament. Scholz calling the results worrying, telling Reuters the AfD is ruining Germany's reputation. But the elections won't immediately change the way Germany is governed, in part because Germany's mainstream parties are vowing to block the AfD from forming a governing coalition. Tonight, AfD's leaders calling that threat undemocratic, saying Chancellor Scholz should take the hint and pack his bags. The election also bringing shocking success for the far left, including a brand new party, the BSW, that came in third in both states. Its leader, a former communist, echoing the far right in rejecting Germany's old guard of centrists, saying the message has arrived. People want change. It's a populist message voters have been sending more and more forcefully across Europe and even in the US. In the UK, the far-right Reform UK gaining ground. Its leader, Nigel Farage, elected to parliament for the first time in July. And in France, the right-wing National Rally gaining dozens of seats, more than ever before, and leaving French government gridlocked for months.
Should we expect more voters across Europe to take a gamble in the future on the far right?
I think you're already seeing it. And by the way, our election is coming up in November, and it's a very similar situation here, I believe.
The big question now is what all of this means for Germany's national elections set to take place next year, and whether the rest of the country will follow this sharp shift to the right. Olaf Scholz has said he plans to run again for chancellor next year, but this election dealt such a blow to Germany's centrists that there are questions now about whether his governing coalition can even hang on until next year.
Mike, when you hear the term far right used to describe the Reform Party, which are kind of in a way sort of a conservative, nationalist, Britain first party, it's a real stretch to describe them as far right, it makes me wonder why there is an appetite to condemn nativist parties, and whether or not you consider that to be a globally coordinated idea. And if it is globally coordinated, is it connected to migration? And is migration part of a broader set of ideas that bring around disruption and disarray? And is it possible to ask these questions and have these conversations without being called racist?
Well, it certainly is attached to the immigration issue, but that's itself is more sort of a subset of the nationalism issue. And it's important, I think, for folks to understand that the term far right is not something that is bandied about as a sort of descriptor label in the abstract. It is part of the general strategy of the blob, the foreign policy establishment who's tasked with overthrowing governments when they get in the way of the U.S., joint U.S.-UK foreign policy, NATO, transatlantic agenda. When they have a trick around anyone who's a threat to democracy, they get to use their special set of skills to overthrow those governments or to flow tens of millions of dollars to political opposition to unseat those political movements. And the term far right is a designation to say that they are outside the bounds of what normal democratic discourse should be. And so the reason they keep barraging far right is because they want to say in a democracy you can be right or you can be left, but you can't be extremist. And if you are extremist, you are undermining democracy. And so we get to sick our democracy promotion programs against them. This gives a license to the U.S. State Department, to USAID, to the National Endowment for Democracy, to the UK Foreign Office, to GCHQ, to everyone who uses that set of skills to unseat authoritarians in Venezuela or Iran or Russia, now gets to take that same program dollars to stop the extremist far right.
Yes, and it's curious to see that this is one of a carousel of issues where there appears to be a global consensus. For example, you can see that there are agricultural movements across the world, and there seems to be an attempt to destabilize small-scale farming. It seems that migration is an issue across the world, and it appears to be handled in a somewhat uniform manner. And I suppose most notably we saw in the pandemic, and for reasons that could be understandable, a cohesive global response. But while that would be entirely legitimate in a sort of a medically authoritative response to a genuine disease and a genuine crisis, what most of us have been left with is that this was an opportunity to assert authoritarianism at an unprecedented scale. We can't continue to bring you this beautiful content without the support of our partners. Hallow, the #1 prayer app and meditation, has been a tremendous help for me on my journey to Christianity. Hallow's new series is called How to Pray. Over the next 2 weeks, an all-star lineup of spiritual leaders and guests can guide you in short daily sessions so that you have the essentials for a deeper prayer practice. You'll learn how to pray with the scriptures and the great spiritual practice of imaginative prayer. You'll learn very old prayers, such as the Rosary, which you know I do each day. Very beautiful. You get new guides every day, including Jonathan Rumi, who played our Lord and Saviour in The Chosen. Jesus is my body double. Bishop Robert Barron, brilliant guest on the show. Father Mike Schmitz. I love Mike Schmitz. He's amazing. And Mark Wahlberg, as well as others. You're going to love it. While you're on Hallow, the app that, just download it on your phone. It's really good. Check out the thousands of wonderful free prayers, meditations, and music. Download Hallow for 3 months free at hallow.com/brand. Use that. They'll know I sent you and that my evangelism is working. I wonder how the use of the phrase far right is being used, like in your country, the United States, in our country, the UK, in relation to the elections in Germany, in relation to events in Brazil, in relation to what's been happening in France, because I don't feel like people are suddenly more racist than they ever have been. I feel that some people have concerns about migration, and wherever you stand on that issue, you'd have to, in a democracy or a republic, listen to the views of the electorate and respond to them. And I feel that what's happening is people are becoming disenchanted with globalism, the kind of deep state, inverted commas, blob powers, and the kind of corporate overreach that is truly global, and that one of the most immediate and available responses is to return to a kind of nationalism, is a concern for boundaries and borders. And so how is it that there is a kind of, how is it that there's such a cohesive and uniform response to an issue that would be diverse if there weren't a centralized authority orchestrating it?
Well, the answer is because of the consensus building process within NATO, which then filters down into the EU and is back channeled by the US and the US State Department. And so just last week, for example, if folks go to my X account, it's at Mike Ben Cyber, I posted a 45-minute consensus building stakeholder conference, the inside guts of it, so people can see exactly how journalists are trained by the NATO propaganda arm at the Atlantic Council and the NATO press office in order to have this consensus set of terms. You can actually see the inside guts of that. I'll put that at the top of my timeline in a second here. But as I heard you describe France, I just made a mini thread so that folks can sort of understand NATO's role and the censorship industry's role in what's happening in the French elections right now. So just to immediately answer your question, they don't give a flying fig Newton about racism. This is the same reason this same apparatus is funding the Azov battalion, which has been infused with Nazism for over a decade and was actually condemned by the U.S. Congress in 2014, and funds were forbidden to flow to them. But then the moment they became geopolitically useful as a battering ram to seize Eurasia from Russia, suddenly they were glorified and they were welcomed in Congress, and we started sending them hundreds of billions of dollars. So, there's the sins of racism can be cleansed immediately the moment you can prove yourself useful to the blob's foreign policy agenda. In fact, racism is often something we cynically exploit in order to mobilize different groups against our adversaries. But just at the top of my page, I'll just sort of read this. This is from the Financial Times. Just 3 months ago, EU and NATO keep nervous eye on Marine Le Pen's bid for French presidency. The far-right candidate wants to rein in Brussels' power and take Paris out of the military alliance's command structures. And then also from French news, Le Pen wants France out of NATO's integrated command, backs NATO-Russia ties. She's also ran on essentially renegotiating Europe's energy posture with Russia. NATO wants to stop Marine Le Pen by any means possible because she is basically the reincarnation of Charles de Gaulle. If folks remember, NATO was headquartered in 1949 in the beginning, not in Brussels, but in Paris. And it was only after de Gaulle ran a sort of make France great again type presidency in the 1960s, and the CIA and NATO essentially backed a coup against de Gaulle. By the way, this is all publicly available. If you look up the CIA's work with Algerians to potentially even assassinate Charles de Gaulle when he was threatening to undermine NATO, which again is the military arm of the blob. So everything that the State Department wants done commercially, and all the State Department's stakeholders and the multinational corporations and banks, everything that the EU is doing, everything that is part of that transatlantic alliance, oftentimes that relies on the immediate military backbone of NATO, but if not, NATO paramilitary support or NATO civil military affairs. And so you need this enforcement arm. And so, what you see right now is an attempt to exploit the civil grievances around identity issues to stop Marine Le Pen. And that would all go away if Marine Le Pen sold her soul and vowed 100% fealty to NATO's political and commercial goals. And so this is happening all over Europe. NATO is hell-bent on stopping AfD in Germany, partly because AfD in Germany is mostly a sort of lower middle-class workers movement who opposed the post-NATO assassinated Gaddafi assassination is what set off the immigration crisis in Europe. So you had these right-wing nationalist parties emerge because of that immigration crisis. But as part of that plank set, the AfD party in Germany, Matteo Salvini's movement in Italy, the Vox party in Spain, Marine Le Pen in France, all of these parties have also run on neutrality with Russia because Russia provides the cheapest energy to the United States. And so the lower middle classes who are getting destroyed by the by the U.S.-led sanctions on Russian energy, and now the full-scale U.S. war against Russia, can all be reversed, and people in Europe will be financially much better off, especially the lower and middle classes, if that U.S. coerced policy in Europe were reversed. But that would fly in the face of the NATO agenda, as well as the commercial and financial interests, who all make windfall profits at massively higher margins by forcing Europe to buy liquefied natural gas from North America instead of natural gas from a Russian pipeline. And so this energy dependence that Europe has on Russia is easily contextualized by the U.S. State Department and the UK Foreign Office as being, sort of Russian puppets. That is, Marine Le Pen is a Russian puppet. The Vox Party in Spain is a Russian puppet. AfD is a Russian puppet. Matteo Salvini is a Russian puppet. And that allows these prosecutions. In every one of these countries, there have been Russiagate-style prosecutions against the political movement. The CIA has been actively involved. The State Department and USAID have been funding opposition to these movements all over. In fact, all of the censorship in these countries comes from U.S. State Department coordinated NGOs who all use this kind of Russiagate predicate to say, even if it's not Russian disinformation they're spreading, Russia wants them to win. So anything they say is Russian propaganda. And so we now get to back channel with Facebook, with YouTube, and previously Twitter 1.0 to censor everything they do to stop this. And they contextualize it as a national security threat for that reason, in terms of NATO and the U.S. Pentagon funding the censorship. But then they contextualize it in U.S. national interests because it undermines essentially our North American energy companies by allowing AfD to win in Germany or Marine Le Pen to win in France. So it's a very nasty, strange brew we have going on here. And this is not a right-wing thing. They went after Keir Starmer right now is the Prime Minister of the UK. The operation that NATO ran against Jeremy Corbyn, who was the former head of the UK Labour Party, who Keir Starmer took his place. You can go right now, if you're listening to this, type in the name Anders Fogh Rasmussen into YouTube right now. Anders, and then Fogh is F-O-G-H Rasmussen. He was the former head of NATO between 2009 and 2014. And just go see what he had to say about Jeremy Corbyn and stopping left-wing populism from rising to power, and Corbyn from winning the election, at that time. So they will play both sides of this because this neoliberal, neoconservative, neo-democracy fusion, faction has enemies both on the populist right and the populist left. It just so happens that in Europe and in the United States, the main parties that have risen to power and that are threatening to rise to power are from the right-wing populist side. But that's what's behind this.
Yes, it's in fact only immediately part of the trend. There was a minute in Europe where parties like Syriza and Podemos in Greece and Spain, respectively, were challenging a more nascent form of this centralized authoritarianism that now appears to be more concerned about attacks from the right. And Jeremy Corbyn, the left-wing Labour Party leader, was attacked for being an anti-Semite and for whatever tropes become available to attack, diminish and dismiss a leader or movement that they don't feel can be contained within their multinational, and multinational feels almost like an intermediary stage before the advent of globalism. They will deploy whatever they have to. I spoke to Steve Bannon once about, he was sort of himself as an obvious advocate for the right. I remember him saying that he was uncertain as to where populism would lead, but more latterly, it could go left or right in it by his reckoning. Of course, he had his personal preferences, but now it seems that we're in a very different moment, because whether you're talking about Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, Keir Starmer, Kamala Harris, there is a sense, if you ask me, that they belong to a very particular ideology, a kind of bureaucratic authoritarian class that can't come out and directly say, we want more power, we want more control, we want a larger state. So they will say, we need to protect you from this, we will protect you from that, we cannot tolerate this form of extremism. And this is a truly global phenomena. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.